This is Frankie Lynch, Saturn Girl. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also comment below. I want to know what you think and it really helps out with the algorithm. So today is part 3 of our Synastry series, and we're going to be talking about harmonious aspects of Pluto and the Moon. So just to remind you all, Synastry is where we take two people's charts and we compare them to see how they interact. Usually we do this with a romantic relationship, but you can also do it with friends, family, or coworkers. Typically we look for how one person's planets aspect the other person's, and also what planets fall into what houses in the other person's chart. And we'll get into this in just a second. So now we interpret synastry charts in two ways, just to remind you. Number one, there's the modern or psychological interpretation, in which planets and points represent interior or psychological parts of ourselves. For example, Mercury would be how we think, speak, and express. Now, the ancient or traditional conception had to do with taking planets and points as representing actual or literal people, places, and things in your life. Now, we have to interpret both ways when it comes to synastry of relationships because both dimensions are represented. So, now, both people are embodied in a particular planetary aspect. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. If your Venus is square another person's Jupiter, then you are the Venus person and they are the Jupiter person in that particular interaction. So we think of these as psychological parts of ourselves that have a particular quality of interaction or interrelation. Now, of course, relationships as a whole, as they always say, are psychological collisions. We crash into each other and push each other's buttons that we didn't even know that we had. So, these are sort of important things to remember because it's a whole picture that enters into a relationship with many, many buttons. So, well, how about Pluto Moon? We're talking about the trines and sextiles here because those are the harmonious aspects. Well, what's Pluto? Pluto is death. He's power, dominance. He's also our sense of fear and trauma, obsession, wealth, and hoarding. He was the subterranean lord. Things welling up from the depths, which is why we say trauma and persistent pain from our past. And having Pluto aspects in synastry isn't necessarily bad. You know, Pluto brings a lot of depth and passion to relationships. You know, especially if you're a Pluto type person. Now, when I say a Pluto type person or Plutonian, I mean someone who's got an abundance of Pluto aspects to what are called personal planets, but especially to the rising sign, the sun or the moon. So those are particularly Plutonian people. So, and you'll see some hallmarks of that in how they relate to people and how they behave in general. They tend to feel things a bit more deeply and be a bit more, reactive and perhaps a bit more brooding or dark and creepy, So, when it comes to Pluto relationships, we want to go to hell and back with each other. We want to be able to bleed together, to heal together, to share our hurts and our traumas. Good Pluto aspects in relationships can indicate a relationship where both partners share their pain with each other, but also process things and heal together. These relationships can be quite deep. And Pluto people, they need that experience of sharing the depths of their souls with someone. They are not satisfied with a superficial type relationship or with superficial type people. Now, this also can signify kink relationships. For those of you who are not aware of kink, you know, gosh, how do I explain it? It's the alternative sexual world with not just sexual relationships, but all types of relationships. Unconventional relationships. Let's leave it at that. These can also be relationships that are based on what's called trauma bonding or abuse, holding the other person hostage in some way. Trauma bonding is where someone comes to, build an unhealthy bond with their abuser. It's like the Stockholm syndrome in a way. So how about the moon here? The moon represents our emotional tides, our moods, the ebbs and flows of emotion. The unconscious nature, or what we do without thinking about it. What we do unconsciously, right? And that famous Carl Jung quote, that which remains unconscious manifests outside as fate. So in a way, symbolically, when we're engaged in self-observation, we're also engaged with becoming aware of our lunar nature. So the moon is also how we react to fear, which is quite interesting given that Pluto also rules that realm of fear. It's also how we find emotional security. The moon's our patterns and our tendencies. So moon aspects in synastry are very important because the moon can show how comfortable we are, one or both partners. Now, good aspects to the moon can represent a sense of security and supported emotions. We feel like people understand us or get us. Bad aspects, though, usually tell us that someone's emotions are being trampled, right? Someone is not getting emotional reciprocity. In fact, someone probably feels sort of like being stepped on. The moon can feed or nourish other planets. And you think about the moon ruling Cancer, and Cancer getting a lot of its symbolism from the moon. And Cancer being associated with nourishment and taking care and nurturing people. Oftentimes, the moon makes others feel more secure. But the moon can also give too much away, especially too much of herself away. She's very giving. And no one can give from an empty cup, can they? As much as you want to. The moon needs to be reminded to take care of herself. Otherwise, she's no good to anyone else. I always recall to people when I used to volunteer with the beach lifeguards back where I grew up, that they would always tell us, you're no good to anyone else if you're drowning. So how about when the moon and Pluto come together by a harmonious aspect? That is either a trine or a sextile. Well, number one, trines are considered the best aspect, aren't they? They're in the nature of Jupiter. It's a harmonizing between these parts of each partner, these interior psychological facets. Whereas sextiles are the second best. They're in the nature of Venus. And they're similar to the trines, just not as good, just, a little bit less. So we see a potential harmonizing between one person's sense of emotions and security with the other partner's sense of power, their trauma, and their pain and possession. So these are very compelling relationships. They're full of intense emotions, aren't they? If you've ever experienced these, you almost feel like you're wrapped up in a storm or a sense of urgency right away. Strong feelings develop very quickly, but we have to be careful about moving too fast because that's where these relationships can sort of devolve into not nice territory, toxic places. So we start sharing all kinds of deep personal stuff right away, don't we? That often becomes the basis on how we relate to each other. You see, the moon is often attracted to Pluto's dark and brooding nature, right? The moon likes bad boys sometimes, or bad girls. I've been with the Pluto girls before, And the moon's always like, oh, I can heal him or her or them. I can heal them. And really, it's just sort of getting yourself in a codependent spiral. So, but Pluto deep down is insecure and feels nourished by the moon's support and devotion, because the moon can be quite devotional and supportive. Think of the symbolism of Cancer. The moon gives Pluto confidence through her devotion. But Pluto can also feel like he wants to possess the moon. It can feel a little bit like, Beauty and the Beast, right? Where, um, you know, Belle is living with the beast and sort of giving him emotional security and support and, showing him a good time. Meanwhile, the beast does not want Belle to leave. He wants to wrap her up and, keep her all for himself. So, Pluto sort of tries to arrange things so the moon won't leave. And sometimes this leads us into deceptive territory. Let's think of the myth of Pluto or Hades, right? And Persephone. So, we get to that climactic point where Demeter, Persephone's mom, is up on Earth, absolutely livid that Persephone is not with her and that Zeus gave her away in marriage. So, that means Demeter is just sort of wreaking havoc, creating a perpetual winter on Earth. And so Persephone says to Hades, yo, dude, I love you. I'm coming back, okay? But my mom is up on Earth, like doing some crazy shit. And I need to go stop her and like make things better. And Pluto is like, okay, I totally trust you. But why don't you just take these pomegranate seeds? For those of you who remember the myth, the pomegranate seeds tied Persephone to the underworld. So this is my understanding of the myth anyway. So you see where the Pluto insecurity was such that he really needed to put a chain around Venus's ankle, didn't he? Whereas Venus is like, not Venus, Persephone, I'm so sorry. Whereas Persephone was like, yo, dude, I'm coming back. Don't trip, it's okay. So you can see that Pluto insecurity there, which leads Pluto to come up with all sorts of ways to keep Venus. And it can be quite exhausting, which can lead us to a roller coaster ride, right? If you're not a Pluto person, this is really tiring and not so much fun. But for us Pluto people, it's sort of like status quo. It's our modus operandi. So, people who aren't typically obsessive, possessive, or jealous will find themselves acting in this way when they're in a Pluto-style relationship or they have this Pluto aspect going on. For those of us who are already Pluto people, this is just like, oh, there we go again. But I've been in relationships with people who weren't Pluto people. And we have these heavy Pluto aspects. And they find themselves getting really, really attached and acting silly and crazy and possessive and doing sorts of things that are very uncharacteristic for them. So things just to be aware of. For example, one partner can find themselves being excessively stalkerish or jealous when they never have that typical tendency. Now, the hard thing about this is it's really hard to break up. If you want to break up, at least. Maybe that's a good thing if you don't want to break up. But we have this experience of having shared so much with each other, of having grown roots into each other, penetrated each other's deepest thoughts and feelings. We almost feel like no one else can ever understand us like that person does. So it's very hard to separate. I describe it as we leave stains on each other's hearts that will never wash away, no matter how many tears we shed over them. I already mentioned the stalkerish part, but this is something we see frequently. One person wants to leave the relationship. They break up. The other person doesn't get over it for a long, long time. Does social media stalking. maybe even goes around the person's house, stalks a new partner or significant other that the person may have. We see lots of toxic behavior with Pluto, but it doesn't always have to be that way. So this sextile is similar to all these things, but just a lot less potent. This can show a couple that goes through crises together and surmounts them. Pluto gets known for transformation. And these types of relationships, they do transform us. They make us entirely different people. And it's almost like we get shattered together. And when people say transformation, what they really mean is a shattering crisis, because that's how we transform. It doesn't happen just like, ooh, I'm transforming, like playing with like Play-Doh or something, So this also can signify a relationship where, people are so attached that they can't escape each other. But these kind of aspects can work well with who? Well, other Pluto people. We like that sort of thing. It's sort of like, anyway. Please, mommy, go to hell with me. People who thrive off of crisis and pain and change, really. There are those types of people. Although we do have to be aware when relationships are actually causing us more trouble than good. We do have to live constructive lives. We have responsibilities to take care of. Now, these types of aspects also work for people who just feel things more intensely and need that sense of urgency and passion, i.e. Pluto people. I wrote down toxic people too, which again, Pluto people. I mean, anyone can be toxic. It just takes a lot of selfishness and self-unawareness. But there are some planetary aspects that tend to correlate with this even more than others. So these aspects can work very well in kink and dominance and submission relationships. I've had experience with this. Relationships that have a dynamic where the moon consciously and actively gives up her power to Pluto. Because it's a consensual thing, you see? Pluto also rules force. And that's not the constructive version of Pluto we want to see. In fact, we'll see that more in the harder aspects, but that's a different video. So now, this sort of power exchange between the two must be based on mutually agreed upon terms. Like I said, I've had this I've had this aspect in relationships, particularly kink relationships, and the sex is super hot. It's just the kind of sex where you're both like clawing at each other like filthy animals. Just, oh, yes. But anyway, it can feel so exhilarating. It feels like fate, like it was meant to be. Like this person is our destiny. Sorry. It feels like you and me against the world. It's just us here, standing against the flames and the onslaught. Pluto is that sort of dark romanticism. We can get very, very attached and codependent. And that gets very draining. But you see, on a positive note, these can also indicate a long-term marriage or partnership because we share so much with each other. It's almost like our souls have grown deep roots into each other. No one understands this as well as that person does, right? That same dynamic. And we feel like we'll never find the same thing again. We'll see this a lot with the twin flame bullshit. The twin flame bullshit is this idea that we will find our other half of our soul in somebody else, that we have a twin flame out there. Suffice it to say, it's a bunch of bullshit. I've done a lot of research on this, and it's a fallacious idea that comes from pop culture. We'll do another separate video on that. But suffice it to say, it becomes a rationalization for narcissistic abuse and for people mistreating each other. So if you hear someone say twin flame, run. Please. I had several different exes say the twin flame stuff, and it just became an excuse for me to be mistreated. So, well, I mean, there's always, we always mistreat each other. But you see what I'm saying? We get ourselves stuck in these spirals of codependency. Excuse me. So yeah, there's a sense of density, but it can degenerate in all these sorts of unhealthy expectations. For example, that we own someone or they belong to us or we belong to someone else. So, I mean, I like seeing this in Synastry. And of course, any aspect can work. But this is sort of like a delightful sense of intensity with each other. And oh my gosh, it can make sex so hot and passionate. It's just like, well, like I said, filthy animals clawing at each other. But it's almost like penetrating into hell with each other. Penetrating into each other's bones. That's just, the French used to call the orgasm le petit mort, right? The little death. For Pluto sex, an orgasm is a big death. So, like I said, this can work, and it can work very well. But Pluto must be able to relax, to be supportive, and to make the moon feel safe while not suffocating her. And please remember that not everything is a life or death situation. Like, chill, dude. Okay? Now, the moon must be able to go deep with Pluto, to feel his wounds and share in the intensity of his experience, to help him feel more secure in the relationship because we remember he's very insecure, and to show some sense of devotion or commitment because that lifts him up and makes him feel more important and needed. And as always, communication is key. That's how we resolve the dissonance between these sorts of things. Remember, though, the trines and the sextiles are mostly good. It's just that when we deal with a malefic planet, sort of like Pluto is, even the easy aspects have their very hard expressions. So anyway, thank you for watching all the way to the end here. And please like and subscribe, comment below, share your experiences, tell your friends, and I give wonderful readings. And thank you for supporting me. I love you and have a wonderful whatever you're having. Okay, and now it's time to end the transmission.